Mr. President, I've come to the floor. I don't come to the floor every day, but every day that I come here, you're presiding. Either I'm coming here more often than I thought, or you're presiding more than most people do, or maybe you just drew the short straw. But at the end of the day, well, I enjoy having these conversations with you, even when most of our colleagues have packed up and headed for places near and far, mostly far. I have a couple of charts here today I'd like for us to go over. And the first one is, I like these bar graphs, and this is an interesting one. It sort of ranks from right over here. This is who is that right there, Colin? Great Britain. We've got Great Britain over here on this axis right here. We have information about who has what relative amount of fuel taxes that the countries have. And some Great Britain, they're the world champs. They have the biggest fuel taxes of anybody, and they have had for quite a while. Over here, all the way over here, is the USA. And there's an outfit called the OEC, which I want to say is the Organization Economic Cooperation and Development. And it has not 41 nations in it. Maybe it has about 38 or so, 37, 38. And, but they're arrayed right here, all right here. And they get as far out as Russia, I think India, in that last one. Who is that last one? Brazil. And, but anyway, this gives you some sense for how different nations pay for their transportation infrastructure. A bunch of nations like Great Britain, they use their fuel taxes to also help balance the budget. And but Great Britain's here. And then we've got these other countries, and come there's Luxembourg and there's Spain and Argentina. You get all the way down here. Who's that right there? Who's that? Pardon? There's Brazil. They're like off the charts. They must not have any fuel taxes to pay for their transportation infrastructure at all. And we're pretty close to them. We're right here, U.S., and we're right between Canada and Mexico. So that's, I wanted to show us that just to give people a sense of, people think, boy, we charge a lot of money for gasoline tax and diesel tax. Well, as it turns out, not so much. Some people think we spend a lot of money, federal budget, for foreign aid. And a lot of times in my town hall meetings, I say, well, people complain, well, we spend way too much money for foreign aid. And I said, well, what percentage of the budget do you think actually goes for foreign aid? Well, people say 20, 25%. And the answer is 1%. So that's the perception. I think the perception here is that we charge with really high fuel taxes compared to the rest of the world. No. We have among the very lowest fuel taxes when you combine state and local of all the developed nations of the world. Let's see what's next here. This is a good chart. It says, how much do we pay in fuel taxes? This is the cost of regular gasoline right here. August 2015, about a month and a half ago. This one over here is this is diesel fuel about August of this year, a month and a half ago. And the retail price here at this time, I guess on average across the country, is about $2.64 for gasoline, and retail price for diesel just about the same, about $2.60 a gallon. It's interesting to see how much of like $2.64 for regular gas. And I'll say in Delaware, I fill up for gas last week at a local Wawa, and paid about $2.11 per gallon. And there are a bunch of stations, probably 1,000 or more, several thousand stations across the country last week where people paid less than $2 a gallon. And but this was the average. You got a couple of states, there's a couple of big states where the prices are higher. California among them. But anyway, what makes up the price of gasoline $2.64? This is back in August. And about 40% of that cost was attributable to crude oil, the cost of crude oil. About another 25% of that $2.64 is attributable to refining costs. Another almost 20%, 19% actually, could be was for the cost of distribution, for distributing and marketing. And you add all that up, and it adds up to about 82, 83% of the cost of gasoline was crude oil, refining, and distribution taxes were about 17%. And again, when you look at our taxes in this country, state and local, we have among the lowest in the developed world, among the lowest, and we just saw that in our first chart. And the numbers over here on diesel are pretty much the same. 40% of the cost of the diesel when you fill up our tanks, so they have a car that uses diesel or truck. About 18% for refining, another 22%. And so about 80% of the cost for a gallon of diesel fuel a month and a half, 2 months ago was, again, crude oil, cost of crude, cost of refining, the cost of distribution and marketing. Let's see what's on our next chart. This chart says gasoline prices are going down nationwide. Well, are they or not? All right, let's look. Average price of gas, October 5th, 2015. What is today? Today is the 8th, my sister's birthday. And 3 days before that birthday, October 5th, gas nationwide, about $2.32 a gallon. About $2.30. Now, from last year, compared to last year, it's down by 98 cents. It's down about $1 from last year. East Coast price of gas, where I come from in Delaware, average price of gas. I said I bought gas last week at Wawa for $2.11. The average price on up and down the East Coast about $2.17 a gallon, and that's down by over $1 from a year ago. New England price is just about the same as the Northeast, $2.23 a gallon. Central Atlantic, it's pretty much where Virginia and Maryland and maybe North and South Carolina. Central Atlantic, $2.22 a gallon. That's down by, these are all down by over $1 a gallon from last year. Lower Atlantic, pretty much the same. Midwest, a little bit more. Gulf Coast states, down close, very close to $2. Here's the Gulf Coast states down around $2.03 per gallon. That's down by roughly $1 from a year ago. Get out to the Rocky Mountain states, and so as you move further to the west, prices go up a little bit. Rocky Mountain states, $2.47, $2.48. That's down by $1. West Coast, about $2.79. That's down by almost $1. And finally, the Pacific Northwest, about $2.50 a gallon, down by, again, $1. Down by $1. So prices are down by, I would say, by about a third. By about a third across the country, please. I like this. I like this poster, Mr. President. And for folks who can't read it, a couple guys sitting in a gas station. The passenger says to the driver, "Hey, I just found some loose change in the cup holder." And the driver says, "Awesome, fill her up." Well, it's not, we're not quite at that point, but we're getting a lot more for the loose change that we find in our cup holder than used to be the case. Now the question is that going to continue? Let's look at this next chart, Mr. President, and see what it shows us. It shows the global price of oil continues to drop. Again, keep in mind about 40% of the cost of gas, 40% at the pump, 40% of the cost of diesel at the pump is attributable to the price at the wellhead. And global, here's a look at these. This is price of crude oil over 2 years. It's 2011, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Here we are. This is starting about the middle of 2014, and just a precipitous drop, some recovery, and then another precipitous drop. Now, and this is even better. So is the price of crude over the last 6 months. Big drop starting about June. In June. And we see what we have down here, about mid-40s, $40 per barrel. Now, that's history. And the question is, looking forward, what can we expect prices to look like? I don't have a magic silver ball or anything like that. But I do know this. The world in which we live is awash in oil. And the United States has been a big contributor to that because of what we're bringing up out of the ground, on the land, and in the seas beside us, beside our country. But there's another country that is I think, number 4 in the world in terms of their strategic reserves compared to the rest of the world. And it's a country that's not been pumping a lot of late, but it's a country that has the ability to pump a lot of oil, and that country is Iran. And today, this month, next month, they can pump maybe 100,000 barrels a day, maybe 200,000 barrels a day. But if they abide by the agreement that we struck with Iran, the Brits, the French, the Germans, the Russians, the Chinese, and us, if the Iranians keep their agreement, which is designed to ensure they don't end up with a nuclear weapon, if they keep that agreement and the sanctions are lifted, they will be able, probably starting more next year than this, they'll begin to pump more oil out of the ground. They have a lot of it to pump. And they have a big reason to want to pump a lot of it, because as bad as our transportation infrastructure is, theirs is a whole lot worse, a whole lot worse. And they need to generate the money, and one of the ways they're going to do it is to pump a lot of oil. So looking forward, can we say the price of gasoline is going to go down? Is it going to stay the same? Well, I would just say this. One of the big factors for us to consider is the fourth biggest oil reserve country in the world is going to start, all things being equal, they're going to start pumping a lot of oil. And that's going to come onto a world market of oil where we're frankly awash in oil. And it's not going to drive the price up, I can assure you. It may keep it steady, can actually drive it down further. All right, let's take a look at the next chart. It's a chart that focuses on what we're investing as a nation and our transportation systems, our roads, our highways, our bridges. And we're looking at actually some numbers that are provided by, this one right here is provided by an outfit called the American Society of Civil Engineers. These are people who make a living by building infrastructure and helping design and figure out what we should build and how we should build it. And it's not just transportation, but it's all kinds of infrastructure. But it certainly includes transportation. They actually grade how we're doing on transportation in this country, roads, highways, bridges. And I think the last time I saw the grade they gave us was a D+. D+. The only thing I can say that's good about that is it's not a D-. But it hasn't been a C, even a C- for a long time. It certainly hasn't been a B for a lot longer. And one of the things that happens is when you got a transportation system where your investments are about a D+. D as in dog. D+ is we end up spending a lot of time in traffic, just sitting there. Texas A&M, every year they come up with a study that says how much time we spend in traffic, just pretty much sitting there, barely moving. And the average across the country is, for the average driver, 42 hours a year. Think about that. That's pretty much like almost 2 days, just kind of sitting there, maybe moving a little bit, but not much. And then for the bigger cities like Washington, D.C., Houston, Texas, or Dallas, or Denver, L.A., the number's more like 82 hours per year, 82 hours per year. It's almost 4 days, just like sitting there in traffic, waiting to move, in your car, truck, or van, or in your big truck, your diesel, or rig, whatever. Okay, that's American Society of Civil Engineers. They say our investment needs are about, this is about $228 billion. Is that per year? That is per year. That is a lot of money. That is a lot of money. And that would, if we were pumping that kind of money into our roads, highways, bridges, our transit systems, we wouldn't have a D+ anymore. We would have a B+, B as in Bravo, as opposed to D as in dog. So that's what, so $228 billion a year would get us. And that would be some new revenues on top of the current revenues we're already generating for roads, highways, and bridges. Now, over the U.S. Department of Transportation, they've said that their magic number here is $171 billion per year. They're talking about $171 billion per year. And they say that is just enough to begin to improve our transportation system. Instead of saying it continue to be degraded, we're putting about $171 billion, that we would see it's just enough to begin to improve our transportation system. Now, over here, this is, again, these are our civil engineers, some of the smart people who help design and build roads. This is the U.S. Department of Transportation. One says we need to be putting in about $228 billion a year. The U.S. Department of Transportation, about $170 billion a year. And our current highway trust fund spending out of our trust fund is $50 billion a year. $50 billion a year. It's not even 20%, maybe not even 25% of what the engineers who build these systems that are telling us, and it's not even a third of what the Department of Transportation says we ought to be doing, so we could just begin to improve our transportation system. Then what this chart says to me is, we're going nowhere fast, and we're woefully underfunding, and if we want to get better, if we want to reduce the amount of time we're just sitting, moving nowhere, we want to reduce the amount of money that we're spending to change our tires, replace our tires, or have our front ends aligned and other repairs on our vehicles, that adds up to about, on average, between $350 and $500 per driver. That's what we're spending now. And so let's see what's next. The U.S. Highway Trust Fund is running out due to political gridlock. And Qatar, I'll read this. It says, where the highway ends. And let me just say, we've had over the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we've had any number of blue ribbon commissions that have been commissioned. We commissioned them in the transportation bill that we passed maybe 6 years ago. And we said, all these smart people, we want you guys and gals to go off and figure out how we ought to pay for transportation. And they came back and said, well, here's what we think a big part of it ought to be user fees. Some for tolling, and some for figuring out how many miles we're actually traveling, vehicle miles traveled, kind of migrating toward that kind of system. But for the most part, it should be user fees. And a big piece of that, at least for now, should be user fees for the amount of gas we buy and for the amount of diesel fuel that we buy, because that generally ensures that the folks who are using our roads, highways, bridges are actually paying for them. And so there's not really been a lot of question among people a lot smarter than me, and even smarter than my colleagues, most of them at least, the folks that are most knowledgeable about this, here's the way we ought to pay for it. And it should be a user fee approach. So the reason why we're not doing that is because of political courage, and I'll say just not an overabundance of that, maybe a lack of it. All right, let's see what's next. Traffic Relief Act, the Tax Relief and Fix the Trust Fund for Infrastructure Certainty Act of 2015. That is a mouthful. And that is legislation introduced by a fellow from Illinois, a fellow named Durbin, and a fellow from Delaware. That would be me. Dick Durbin and I came here to I was a Navy guy for many years before, and ended up as treasurer of Delaware and congressman for a while, governor now here. And Dick came here in 1982. We both were elected in 82 to the House. And we found out when the first day on the job, sworn in January 3rd, 1983, the Social Security Trust Fund was about to run out of money. I mean, entirely. And we're not going to talk about in 1983 reducing Social Security benefits by 5% or 10% or 20%. By the end of 1983, we're going to run out of money, and we couldn't pay anything for Social Security benefits. And fortunately, in 1982, some really smart people, Blue Ribbon Commission, got together, chaired by Alan Greenspan, who went on to become Federal Reserve Chairman. They said, here's how we ought to pay for it. And Durbin and I, a lot of Democrats and a lot of Republicans, all of us together said, that makes sense, let's do it. Combination of reductions in benefits, combination of additional revenues, and got the job done. And Social Security is not set forever, but it's lasted for another 30, 40 years, and we need to do some more to fix it. But that is the kind of resolve that we need, bipartisan resolve. The legislation that Senator Durbin and I have introduced in this instance, maybe a little more than a month ago, would raise about $220 billion for the Highway Trust Fund over 10 years. And that's on top of amount of money that we're already going to spend anyway over the next 10 years. And I think that would be another maybe $400 billion, roughly. Yeah, 350, about $350 billion. You add that to 220, and that gives us $570 billion. So does this get us from a D plus to an A or an A minus or even a B plus? No, it doesn't. But it gets us, it moves us in the right direction. It moves the needle in the direction it needs to go. It provides for $90 billion to fully fund highways and transit programs, fully fund them, and about $130 billion for new investments in repairs and upgrades. And we need to do those new investments, and we certainly need to do the repairs and the upgrades. Let me just close with this. I want to thank Senator Durbin for joining me in this effort. People vote for us to come here and make tough decisions. People expect us to work together. People expect us to get things done. People especially expect us to do things that help strengthen the economic recovery, which is underway, to make it more robust going forward in the future. And we can do that. We can do that. And it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out how. A lot of smart people in these blue ribbon commissions have been telling us for years, the way to do it is move toward tolling, move toward eventually toward some kind of vehicle miles traveled system, where the actual miles that we travel, we actually pay some kind of fee. But they've also said for now, because those other two ideas are not fully realized, and won't be, especially the vehicle miles traveled, we're not going to be there for probably 10, 20 years. In the meantime, we have all this work that needs to be done and paid for. And they've said the best way to do it is to ensure that we pay. Those of us using the roads, highways, bridges pay for that, and we've been using gas tax, diesel taxes to do that. I'll close with this. I'm not a big coffee drinker, but I stopped by a carryout that we have downstairs in the basement here. They're open whenever we're in session. And you can go get a sandwich or some soup or something, yogurt, and they also sell coffee. And some days, especially when we're in session late at night, I've not been doing that much lately, but when we're in session, like, they sell a lot of coffee. And the coffee is anywhere from like the smallest cups, I think, is about $1.70. The middle-sized cups are maybe $2.50. Largest cups are maybe $3, something like that. If you go to Starbucks, you pay a lot more for a cup of coffee than that. You can pay as much as $5, I'm told, at Starbucks. I don't buy much coffee there. But I bought a cup of coffee here today, and it was a little more than $2 for a middle-sized cup of coffee. As it turns out, if we actually raise the user fee, the gas tax and the diesel tax, for 4 cents a year, which is what Dick Durbin and I called for, 4 cents a year for 4 years, and the federal gas tax has been 18 cents for 22 years. Since 1993, it's been 18 cents. It's now worth, in real dollars, it's not worth 18 cents anymore, because in inflation, it's worth like less than a dime. The diesel tax is about 23 cents. It's not worth 23 cents anymore. It's been that since 1993. It's worth less than 15 cents. And in the meantime, price of concrete up, asphalt up, steel up, labor up, and the major way we pay, principal way we pay for roads, highways, bridges, and transit is, frankly, it's greatly diminished in value. If we were to actually raise, as Senator Durbin and I are suggesting, price of these user fees, gas tax, diesel tax, by 4 cents a year for 4 years, that would add 16 cents to the price of gasoline. And for the average driver, that turns out to be, on a weekly basis, it works out to just about the price of a cup of coffee. Just about the price of a cup of coffee. Now, here's a question I would ask. I think if we ask most drivers in this country of ours today, when they're sitting in traffic trying to get someplace, whether they're here in the Mid-Atlantic area, or up in the Northeast, or out on the West Coast, or other places, if you ask them, would you be willing to, 4 years from now, be paying an amount of money equal to the price of a cup of coffee in order to spend a lot less time sitting in traffic going nowhere, or running the potholes that destroy your tires and your front end alignment and other things as well? Would you be willing to pay on a weekly basis, see the amount of money you spend on a cup of coffee? My guess is most people say, that doesn't seem like a bad deal. That doesn't seem like a bad deal. And you know what? They'd be right, because it's not a bad deal. And what we have to do is close with this. I'm from Delaware. People are here from all over the country to represent their states. In 12 of the 50 states in the last 2 years, 2013, 2014, those states, mostly red states, with Republican governors and Republican legislatures, and guess what a dozen of those states have done? They've raised their user fees. They've raised their user fees. Not by like $1 all at once, or even $0.50 or a quarter, but they've raised them in some cases by pennies or a nickel or more over a couple of years. And then last November, in those 12 states, they had elections. They had elections. And this interesting story. The state legislators who voted to raise the user fees to actually pay for the roads, highways, bridges in those states, guess what happened when they ran for re-election? They got reelected. Amazing. They showed political courage. They did the hard thing. 95% of the Republicans who were running for re-election last November in those states where they raised their user fees, gas tax, diesel tax, they got reelected. You know who didn't get reelected in some of those states? The legislators who voted against raising the user fees, who did not support making investments in transportation. How about the Democrats in those states? Well, the Democrats in states where they raised the user fees to pay for their transportation investments, almost 90% of them won their primary last November. They won the general election. They got reelected too. They did better than the legislators who voted against those increases. Think about that. So I like to say, Mr. President, I like to quote Thomas Jefferson from time to time. And Jefferson used to say, if people know the truth, they won't make a mistake. And I'd like to think the same thing is true here. If my colleagues and I know the truth, we won't make a mistake either. People think it's political suicide to vote to raise these user fees. And you can't get reelected by doing the right thing. And you know what? You can. You can. And there's a lot of evidence to show that it can't happen. And I'll close with the words of, not of Jefferson, but of Mark Twain, who said a lot of things, a lot of funny things. One of the things he said that I think is especially appropriate here, when he said, Mark Twain said, in the end, tell the truth. You will confound your critics and amaze your friends. And the truth is, we need to make these investments. And the other truth is, this is not political suicide. At the end of the day, we're actually going to get, I think more often than not, rewarded for doing the hard thing and the right thing. And my hope is that we will do that, and I will continue to make that case. Last, one more great quote, Mr. President. And Wayne Gretzky, I don't know if they play much hockey down your way. We play some in Delaware. But Wayne Gretzky said a lot of memorable things in his life, great hockey player, now retired. He used to say, people say to me, Mr. Gretzky, why are you such a good hockey player? He would say, I go where the puck will be, not where the puck is. Think about that. I go where the puck will be, not where the puck is. And Wayne Gretzky also said, it's one of the other things that he said that I especially like. He said, I miss 100% of the shots. Talking about taking a shot on goal. He said, I miss 100% of the shots that I never take. Think about that. I miss 100% of the shots I never take. Well, I'm convinced this is a shot worth taking. And I'm going to push very hard to make sure that somebody's here, and Dick Durbin, my guess is some others too, as we go along, will encourage folks to join us in this effort. This is a just cause. Sure. Mr. President, I don't see anybody else who's waiting in line to speak. So with that, I suggest the absence of a quorum.